An attack on America, its Constitution, and primarily it's an attack on God.
What is Christian nationalism?
Americans kneel to God and God alone.
America should stop making God angry.
That phrase, Christian nationalism.
A Christian nationalist is someone that believes America is a Christian nation and the government ought to keep it that way.
All these Jews need to die.
We have multiple casualties inside the synagogue. We have 3 officers who have been shot.
Members of the Tree of Life Synagogue, conducting a peaceful service in their place of worship, were brutally murdered by a gunman targeting them simply because of their faith.
Tonight, Pete Hegseth is again facing scrutiny after inviting a self-described Christian nationalist to deliver a prayer service at the Pentagon.
Christo-religious cultural hegemony, which is a mouthful, so we'll call it CRCH, has functioned as one of the most pervasive and harmful social influences in America, resulting in delayed development, substandard and expensive healthcare, and the justification of costly and deadly interventionist conflicts abroad. Okay, well, first, what is CRCH? Well, the second part, CH, cultural hegemony, quote, refers to the dominance of one cultural group over others within a society, end quote. Therefore, cultural hegemony often dictates a society's norms, values, fundamental political beliefs, and even laws. And as you've probably put together by now, America is a majority Christian nation. Therefore, the previously mentioned dominant cultural group is Christians. Now, before we start, let me be clear. This is not an attack of Christians or Christianity as a religious belief, or any other religion for that matter. This video is simply intended to expose how religious influence has both historically and culturally perpetuated undesirable and harmful events and realities both domestically and abroad. And ideally, with that premise proven, it will encourage us to be a little more mindful of that precious separation of church and state. Alright, to start, we actually have to go way back to the year 1619, when the first slaves landed in modern-day Hampton, Virginia. This was the start of the slave trade in America, and it wouldn't be until 246 years, a proclamation, a civil war, and an amendment later that the horrific and inhumane practice would officially come to an end. Yet, although legally ended, many people, particularly citizens in the South, refused to let go of these racially charged beliefs. But this stubbornness wasn't particularly surprising in the South. Religion played a central role in essentially every person's life, and it also played a central role in the justification of slavery. The curse of Ham, a biblical story, states that Noah places a curse upon his son, Ham's descendants to be, quote, servants of servants, end quote. Pro-slavery theologians took this to mean that Africans who were already enslaved and or inferior must all be descendants of Ham, and therefore they should remain enslaved. This religious rhetoric, along with a plethora of others, such as the idea that enslaving Africans was moral because it introduced them to God, all worked to entrench the South in these deeply held beliefs about racial hierarchy and slavery, which made moving on with the rest of the country post-1865, and a pretty solid whooping from the North, very difficult, and this reluctance would have consequences. Following the Confederate defeat in the Civil War, CRCH had a firm grasp on the South. But now, instead of its perpetuation of racism outwardly, its most harmful effects were actually inwards towards those who were part of the dominant group. Instead of putting down non-whites, a common practice in the South was emerging. To cope with their tarnished legacy, Southerners began latching onto the idea of genetic superiority through religiously adjacent historical figures. Those of English descent in the South believed they were descendants of William of Normandy, who defeated King Harold of Wessex to become the King of England, and whose royal bloodline was divinely ordained by God. While a resurgence in pride and identity is not unique to the South, such as Germany post-World War I, and even its growth in the South wasn't purely or even primarily due to religion, it's crucial to acknowledge the role that CRCH played in validating these reclusive and prideful narratives as they emerged. Entering the 1900s, the culture of extreme pride in the South was flourishing with the help of religious backing, such as the Lost Cause movement, which aimed to cast the Confederacy's loss in the Civil War in as flattering a light as possible to protect the South's self-image, and it did so by painting Confederate General Robert E. Lee as the perfect Christian soldier who only lost because he was betrayed by the scoundrels in the North. While these are just two examples of how CRCH continued to force the South upstream against the flow of progress, ironically, this prideful narrative they were latching onto would actually hurt them. Between 1909 and 1914, the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission for the Eradication of Hookworm Disease, or RSC, set into the southern states with the intention of appointing state directors and creating permanent government agencies to combat the hookworm parasite. But they met passionate resistance from the southern states, particularly from Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, and South Carolina. The southern states didn't want a top-down system from the north telling them how to manage their sanitation, which really meant managing their racial and social hierarchies. So these states delayed their integration with the RSC by years, even claiming that they could handle the parasite better on their own than with help from the north. However, this resistance and self-reliance was short-lived, and between 1912 and 1913, all 4 states allowed RSC to help them eradicate the parasite in the South. Although eventually a happy ending, the concerning trend of putting individual identity and pride over the practical needs of citizens didn't stop here. CRCH might have helped cultivate the culture of pride that slowly isolated the South, but its effects were about to be felt nationwide. In 1945, President Harry Truman proposed a national health insurance plan with a cradle-to-grave concept. Opponents of Truman and groups like the AMA, American Medical Association, did not like the plan because it introduced novel regulations on businesses and said that the government would provide healthcare to everyone regardless of employment. This meant that the corporation would lose the major leverage of people needing healthcare and therefore needing to be employed regardless of the quality of their job. So they teamed up with ministers and pushed the idea that Christianity and capitalism were one and the same. You work hard and make money in capitalism, just like you act right and go to heaven in Christianity. They demonized Truman's proposed healthcare plan, calling it socialized healthcare and sinful since it effectively turned the government into a false idol. This rhetoric was specifically salient since it took place during the Cold War, and anything related to communism and the Russians was deeply feared and stigmatized. Fast forward to today, and 61% of Americans worry about the availability and affordability of healthcare, with healthcare at the top of Americans' key concerns. Regardless of your religious or political beliefs, the fact that the majority of Americans today are worried about affording healthcare and believe that the government should ensure healthcare for everyone means that turning our backs on the idea of universal healthcare back in 1945 on religious pretenses was the wrong choice to make. This leaves us at the present day, specifically the present-day conflict with Iran. Now, while there are many opinions and differing official reasons for why this war started, there is one thing that isn't up for debate. The Secretary of Defense should not be quoting fake Bible verses from Pulp Fiction during a prayer session for a downed American pilot. Nevertheless, on April 15th, that exact thing happened. Now sure, prayer from government officials during conflict isn't new or bad. And yeah, on paper, Samuel L. Jackson and Ezekiel 25:17 probably sound somewhat similar. But this isn't the issue. The issue is that this is not the only instance of religious rhetoric being invoked regarding this deeply unpopular and harmful war. From military generals calling this war divinely sanctioned and bringing the return of Jesus closer, to the president calling the rescue of the downed pilot an Easter miracle, the entire conflict with Iran has slowly generated a religious dimension to it. Government and military officials, despite domestic frustration and increasing gas prices related to the war, are leaning into religion more and more as a way to justify the continuation of the conflict. Similar to the South and the parasite, even when presented with a harmful reality that negatively affects the citizenry, CRCH inserts itself as a buffer between harmful practices and their would-be justified critics. The power that religion has in the government, politics, and policies that affect every person's everyday life is palpable, regardless of what the Constitution says. Okay, but am I being fair? Some people might argue that nothing I've spoken about was directly due to religion. Therefore, it's not actually religion's fault at all. And I would say that you are absolutely right. Sort of. Nothing I've discussed happened because of the Christian religion and CRCH, and I'm willing to concede that addressing CRCH won't necessarily prevent similar or other instances of poor decision-making in our country. However, It is the culpability of CRCH in the process leading up to and justifying these choices we've made that needs to be recognized. In different ways throughout our history, we've let religion slowly slip into choices that affect everyone. And in an increasingly diverse nation, it is crucial that we recognize that one of the ways to fix what isn't working is to separate CRCH and state.